So today for our mindfulness light session, we'll be talking about how mindfulness can apply to food, to eating, to nourishment for our bodies and mind. So we're going to cover a number of things. First, we're going to learn how to develop a practice of eating as a form of meditation and establish a step-by-step guide to engage the full process of relating with food as nourishment. And we're going to be doing this by actually looking at the foundations, the ways that we can practice mindfulness and apply it to all aspects of our life. And then we'll get into the specifics and give some examples of how that can be applied to eating. And then lastly, you can reference, I'll have other options for two mindfulness practices with eating and some of our other correlated videos. But first, a little bit about why we would practice mindfulness and eating. So just a quick note, there's a lot of research now in the past 20 years to talk about the benefits of mindfulness when applied to food and to our everyday practice of eating. And some examples of research are reducing overeating and binge eating. It's been seen to support weight loss and body mass index, help individuals cope with chronic eating problems such as anorexia and bulimia, and reduce anxious thoughts about food and your body, and improve the symptoms of type 2 diabetes. So you could see that it has wide applications, and these are more potentially severe cases of issues with eating, but also it can benefit all of us to include this in our daily lives. So I have two quotes here, and this is from Thich Nhat Hanh. He's one of a renowned meditation and mindfulness ambassadors. And so he has these wonderful quotes about how food can really be integrated into our idea of nourishment. He says, for example, at its most essential, the apple you hold is a manifestation of the wonderful presence of life. It is interconnected with all that is. It contains the whole universe. It is ambassador of the cosmos coming to nourish our existence. It feeds our body, and if we eat it mindfully, it also feeds our soul and recharges our spirit. So you can imagine, yes, we can just go and fuel ourselves with an apple, or sometimes when we take a moment to recognize how this apple comes into being, it can have much more impact on our whole mind, body, spirit. And then we go a little bit further into how mindfulness can be applied everywhere. So he says, as you see, mindfulness practice does not need to be another add-on. So it's not something that you have to take another part of your day to do. It's not something that you have to put on your list of things to do. It can just be integrated into everything that you're already doing. He goes on to say, its beauty lies in the fact that it can be fully and is easily integrated into every act of our daily living, reminding us to live the present moment fully. So again, this is not something that you have to necessarily go to another place or carve out another moment of your life. It's something that we can just add in to what you're already doing. We already eat several times a day. So now mindfulness can be this component of it that can make it richer. It can hopefully add to the health of your experience. So I'm going to talk about the what and the how of mindfulness. So what is making up what we do in the practices of mindfulness. So the three things that we do is we practice observation, observing, describing, and then we practice participating. These are three ways in which you can practice mindfulness. And as you can imagine, observing, describing, participating are things that you can apply to every activity in your life. So first start with observing. So when you observe with mindfulness, you're going to be, for instance, noticing your environment, paying attention to your body senses, sensations, right? So smell, taste, touch, the sensation on your skin, if you're talking about food, sensation on your tongue, your mouth, and then focus the attention. You're gonna focus your attention when you're observing. Practice watching thoughts and emotions. So we're gonna be observing not only just maybe what's outside of us, but also maybe the thoughts that we have associated with it and any feelings that might come up. And observing again, for that example, of both inside and outside of yourself. And I included these pictures because you can imagine just for a moment potentially that just by observing pictures of food, you might observe and notice some things about your experience. You might notice a response in your body. You might notice a thought or association you've had to food before. So, pictures, visualization, that can be a way to practice observation. Again, anything in your environment, and food, such an awesome way to do this several times a day. Description, another aspect of practicing mindfulness. So it's not just noticing and observing, it's actually putting words into your experience. By describing things, you notice you can get more mentalization, get closer to that which you're experiencing. So you can label what you observe. So for instance, in the pictures we saw before, maybe you can label the colors that you see with your food. And again, this could be applied to all aspects, not just food. So you could describe, for instance, the experience that it is watching this video, or what it's like to drive to work, or before when you're making food for your family, or when you're exercising. These are all ways that you can practice mindfulness. For your interpretations, so you can describe your interpretations and opinions about it, right? So just noticing what your interpretations and opinions are, and you're going to be, actually that's supposed to be watch, not what. You're going to be watching for those. So we often have lots of interpretations and opinions going on with our experiences. We're going to watch for these so that we can have some awareness about what it is that we're, what sort of interpretations, opinions we put on things, and how that impacts our experience with any of our activities. Focus on the senses, which supports the description. And we talked about that in observation, but then we can take it a step further and again describe it. So describe the texture of something, describe the quality of the air, describe the texture of the clothes on your skin. Again, these are all ways of practicing mindfulness. So, and then the last, what of mindfulness, so this is what makes up mindfulness, is participation. So throwing yourself completely into the activity, becoming one with whatever you're doing. And it also encourages us to act intuitively, what is needed for the situation. Go with the flow and respond with spontaneity. So this would be, rehearsing, practicing, being prepared, thinking ahead, taking in or considering what's gone on in the past in order to influence your decision making. These are all very, very helpful skills. However, we often don't recognize that we're in one of those places and not actually just responding and observing, describing, experiencing what's happening right in front of us. So another way that we practice mindfulness is to fully be in the experience. One of the other coaches of this DIAITA-like program, or the DIAITA program, is a boxing coach, and I've actually practiced boxing with her before. And when I participate, the best way to participate in boxing, yes, you have to rehearse the moves and think things slowly, but to be fully there. I notice if I'm thinking about whatever else is going on in my day or what's happened or how I should be doing something, I can't actually fully experience what is happening right in front of me, and my activity is usually less fruitful, less full of like a production or my best offering in the moment. So again, this is throwing yourself completely into whatever you're doing. That's what you could do to practice mindfulness. Now we're going to go into how we're going to do this. So we're going to, observe, describe, participate, and these are the ways in which how we can do those. We're going to do it non-judgmentally, one mindfully, and effectively. These will help us to have a more full experience in those ways in which we're practicing mindfulness, and you'll see in the details as we go through them. Non-judgmentally, you're going to see that you don't evaluate something as good or bad. Now again, using judgment is not a problem. Using judgment is very useful for us. However, we often are applying judgment when we're not even aware of it. And an aspect of practicing mindfulness is being aware of our judgments and practicing evaluating things not necessarily in just good or bad terms, but seeing something as just how it is, not necessarily having an opinion about it, but looking at it as maybe a little bit more factually and simply. Another aspect of practicing non-judgmentalness is fully accepting it. So often we are in an experience with an interaction with someone, we're, for instance, experiencing the weather, and we are resisting our experience. And the reality is we don't have control of the weather. For instance, the weather is going to be what it's going to be. And an aspect of practicing non-judgmentalness would be to just fully accept it so we can relate with our experience or the weather, for instance, as it is. Then acknowledging but not judging is an aspect of mindfulness and the how we would do this non-judgmentally. So we would, again, there's a difference between acknowledging and using judgment or opinion about something. We can acknowledge the weather, but we don't necessarily have to put an opinion on it. You could practice having some sort of space between those things. And then watch not to judge or judging. So it's really easy if you get this idea that you're not supposed to be judging, then to judge yourself for judging. And I want to encourage in how we approach this and how we approach mindfulness is to watch our judgments of our practice and how we judge, and to attempt to give some space again, to maybe create a gap, to notice when we're judging ourselves and maybe consider something different. Oh, there I'm judging again. And then try to see if we can have a different experience maybe in the next breath or in the next moment. Another way we practice, or how we practice mindfulness, is this term one mindfully. So one mindfully is the idea that we can have a little bit more focus on what we do. Again, it's not bad to be multitasking. Multitasking is a great skill and sometimes is very much needed. And we can get so caught up in so many of the things that we have to do that we get distracted and we don't give our focus and attention to one thing completely, and that can diminish what we can again offer or connect with in that moment, or engage with, or let's say you're even doing work. It's hard to be working when you have all of these other distractions on. If I'm creating this PowerPoint, for instance, if I have a TV show in the background, I may miss some things because I'm having to negotiate two things at once versus just focusing on one thing at a time. It makes it easier for me to concentrate on what I have in front of me. So and I went ahead on accident. So again, one mindfully, so doing one thing at a time, being aware of the distractions and practicing letting go. Again, we have plenty of distractions, so doing things one thing at a time can offer us, our mind, our bodies, a little bit of a break and a little bit easier ability to connect with what is happening right in front of us. And then concentrating our mind. So this takes some focus. It's we are so often easily habituated to be distracted. So remembering and having some discipline around focusing. And I'll talk a little bit about how we could apply this to eating later. And then a last way of how we would practice mindfulness is effectively. So thinking about actually having some sort of structure, some sort of discipline around it. It doesn't have to be super rigorous or rigid. However, having some sort of focus, having some sort of ways and structure in ways that we do this can help us. So maybe, for instance, we might identify that we want to do a mindfulness practice for 5 minutes. Okay, I'm going to eat my food and focus on my food for 5 minutes. Or maybe I'm going to focus on one of my senses to use and do this for a set period of time. Maybe every time I eat a meal or one meal a day, I'll do this. Maybe when I do my movement. Movement is one of my favorite ways that I do this, and I'll have another DIAITA light session where we'll be talking about that. So you're going to be practicing awareness of your goals. So you can do things when you're practicing mindfulness with some sort of direction. It can be great to fully participate, but having some sort of, again, structure around that can help us to fully fall into that. So I was giving examples of the structure of time, the structure of your practice. You could use the form of observing, describing, participating. These are all ways that you can have some sort of goal in mind. Focusing on what works. So, there's lots of different ways to practice mindfulness. I would encourage you to experiment and play and see what works best for you. And not to, again, have to make it another elaborate, hard to reach thing outside of your day. It can just be something that works for you, right? What you find is easy, what you find is maybe attractive or seems like fun to you or enticing. You don't have to do the hard thing in order to be practicing mindfulness. So focus again on what is easiest for you. And then you can build more on top of that if you want to elaborate on it, but I would start there. And then acting as skillfully as you can. So I work with a fair amount of teens, and sometimes it's the reminder that skillfulness can be a mindset, right? That we can take on the idea that maybe we can practice with some skill might support us, not doing things in kind of a disorganized or in a way that is chaotic, right? Having some sort of approach and discipline in what we're approaching. And then lastly, being willing. So if you already kind of have it written off that mindfulness isn't going to be working for you, and you're just like, well, it's not gonna happen. Or, kind of having this approach of like sitting on your hands or, being resistant. That will definitely influence your ability to practice mindfulness. So an aspect of practicing it effectively is practice willingness, and willingness itself can be a practice of mindfulness, an aspect of mindfulness. So we're going to talk about some mindful eating applications. Again, we're going to observe non-judgmentally, one mindfully and effectively. So some examples, some ways that you can actually pair this with food is you can observe the environment and how the food is presented. You can observe urges. Maybe you see the urge or you notice the urge to eat more or to not eat when the food is being offered. Sometimes, for instance, I'll notice I'm not even halfway through my meal and I'm thinking already about getting more. Noticing that urge and then observing it and not just being totally reactive in it, right? Getting some more information. Emotions. So the emotions that might be correlated when you eat food, the environment that you're in when you're eating food. These are all ways that you can practice mindfulness. You can observe your breath in relationship to eating. Noticing the breath, noticing how much you breathe, noticing how little you breathe, the fullness. It can affect the ways in which you experience digestion, all of that. And it just could be interesting to notice. And then your senses with food. Smell, taste, sensation, and sounds. These are all the ways in which we interact with food has a big role in the way that we're actually experiencing it. Another aspect, so we did an observation, now we're going to describe non-judgmentally when mindfully and effectively. We can notice and we can describe the origin of the food. So I have some pictures here of a food being grown. And we can think about, before we dive into eating, where this food came from. This food, as was referenced in the quote earlier, usually takes a very long process to get to where we are in its preparation, and from seed to being sown or being harvested. There's lots of different steps, and when we notice that, it could be practice of how the food impacts us, how we can be nourished by it. Put into words what you notice from your senses. So not just having the experience of it, but maybe you can add some words of like the crunch or the richness, maybe the different texture of the food. You could describe the experience of eating and then describe thoughts associated with it. And lastly, again, a mindful eating application is just participating fully. And you can do this in lots of different ways. You can silently eat your food and bring all your attention to your experience. And in a meditation that I'll be guiding in another video, it'll give an example of ways that you can be practiced with yourself, just in relationship to yourself. You're not going to have a conversation with other people. You're just eating and thinking and feeling and experiencing the food. And I'll offer meditation to specifically do that later, but you don't even have to be doing a formal guided meditation. You could just silently eat your food. Connect with pleasure. So the idea is that we don't necessarily have to just think of food as another way to plow through our day. It can be utilized as a moment of pleasure, because food often can be a way to experience pleasure. Preparing your food with your full attention. So I remember I had this experience with a loved one who was being hospitalized, and I was doing lots to help support this person, lots of details of getting their family connected with all the details of what was going on with them and logistics, running them from there, getting them medication, etc. And it was very stimulating to my system, and it brought up a lot of emotion because this was a loved one. And I remember I didn't have a lot of time, and yet I needed to eat to fuel myself. So that was my moment to recharge. So I remember taking a carrot and just slowly taking a few moments to slice the carrot before I was eating it, and actually paying attention to the color and the sound and the smell when I was cutting this carrot. And it was immensely regulating to my system. And again, the mindfulness practice that was so helpful to me in that moment to ground, I felt much more calm, much more connected with myself. My stimulation was brought down. My emotions were put at ease for a moment. This was just through doing the simple act of cutting a carrot. So again, this is how we can apply mindfulness with all these little aspects. These are all different ideas of how you can practice it, and just apply it in moments throughout your day, and specifically here with eating food. And lastly, taking moments in a meal to fully immerse yourself in one aspect of the experience of eating. So you don't have, sometimes when we think of mindfulness, I think the idea is we think we have to be really rigid and good and have meditation going on while we're eating, and that's not it at all. You can do that, and it can be a way to really immerse yourself in a different way with food, because often we're so distracted when we're eating. And you can just do something like, maybe you take a couple of moments during your meal. You don't even have to focus on the food. What if you focus on the company in relationship to your food? Or what if you notice on just the colors of the food, or the smell of the food, or the taste of your food, or how much how fast or slow you eat it, or your breath. These are all ways that you can totally immerse yourself in just one aspect that can really enrich in your any meal that you're eating in any situation. And so that is kind of the what, the how of practicing mindfulness, and then how it could be applied for food. And then we'll be talking about and offering some guided meditations, a mindfulness prayer, and also a specific guided meditation in slowly eating one morsel of food.